Hey students, it's Miss Kellogg here. We have this is the 5.6, 5.06 read along for art class, Art and Politics. If you click like here, it takes you to the lesson introduction. Many modern artists use their work to make political statements about international events and social injustices. The post-World War I was a time of revolution, extremism, and intolerance. In Europe and America, painters expressed their anger in politically charged canvases that confronted viewers and challenged their attitudes. We have two paintings here to show. Right here is the student guide. That's where you click to download the student guide. As you read through the lesson, you can use your student guide to take notes. Europe and America after World War I. For victor and vanquished alike, the 2 decades followed the world to end all wars, comprised a period of political upheaval. In Russia, revolutionaries overthrew the Tsar in 1917 and established the Soviet Union as a communist state. In 1922, the right-wing fascist party gained control in Italy. In 1933, the Nazis took over Germany. 3 years later, Spain erupted in the civil war between the nationalists supported by Germany and Italy and the Soviet-backed Republicans. England, France, and the United States weathered the storm with their democracies intact, but faced economic instability and domestic unrest. In all 3 countries, socialist, communist, and anarchist splintered groups agitated for change, sometimes violently. In America, a large influx of immigrants, 2 million from Italy alone, in the first decade of the 20th century, fueled a climate of ethically motivated fear and suspicion against foreigners and political radicals. Here are some photos here. Social and political statements in art. Art that depicts social and political injustices is nothing new. Romantic artist Francisco Goya painted the 3rd of May, 1808, to commemorate the brutal killing of Spanish peasants by Napoleonic soldiers during the French occupation of Spain. Eugene Delacroix depicted the 1830 revolt in France against the monarchy of liberty leading the people. The upheaval of the early 20th century spurred artists like Ben Shahn, and Pablo Picasso to create works that made strong social and political statements about the injustices of that day. Shahn and other artists who made a career of depicting the ugly side of the contemporary life belonged to an art movement that historians label social realism. Social realism championed the working class to work telling of poverty, war, labor issues, and political corruption. The artists wanted their work to appeal to the viewer's sense of morality rather than to be images that appeal to the eye. Ben Shahn. Working in 1898 in Lithuania, then part of the Russian Empire, Ben Shahn was 4 when his father was exiled to Siberia for subversive activities against the Tsarist regime. In 1906, his father escaped and the entire family immigrated to Brooklyn, New York. Shahn began his artistic studies as an apprentice lithographer and then went on to study painting. In 1924, Shahn married Tilly Goldstein, and the two traveled extensively throughout North America and Europe. When Shahn studied the expressive works of art such as Henri Matisse, Pablo Picasso, Paul Klee, and others. When he returned to New York, Shahn had developed his own style of social realism. He explored themes and social injustices and used his paintings to provoke dialogue around important issues. Shahn was also an accomplished photographer who worked alongside Dorothea Lange and Walker Evans for the Farm Security Administration. Shahn amassed an incredible collection of photographs that provided inspiration for both content and composition in his paintings. This case of Sacco and Vanzetti. In early 1930s, Shahn completed a series of wash paintings about the highly publicized 1929 trial of Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti. These 2 Italian immigrants and self-professed anarchists were accused of killing 2 men during a robbery. Even though the evidence against them was unequivocal, the presiding judge showed a clear bias towards the prosecution. A Massachusetts court found that Sacco and Vanzetti guilty of murder, and they were sentenced to death in the electric chair. What is an anarchist? Anarchism is a political philosophy that advocates the elimination of all government power and institutions through the violent means, if necessary. Anarchists have constituted a fringe element of European society at least as far back as the French Revolution. America, too, has a small but vocal cadre of homegrown anarchists who ranked or swelled considerably during the great immigration wave of the early 1900s. Sean also, with many others who had followed the trial closely, felt that the verdict was a travesty and that the court had convicted Sacco and Vanzetti based solely on their ethnic origin, and anarchists believed that Sean painted the passion of Sacco and Vanzetti to express his outrage. Here is the painting. Let's explore it on this page. The portrait of the child drives Webster Thayer with his hands raised with moral piety is prominently displayed above the courthouse steps in the background. Thayer supervised the trial and the appeal process, yet was a controversial, outspoken figure who bragged of the convicting and radical Italians. Two members of the review panel and the president of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, as a retired judge named Grant, stand over the coffins, dressed in formal top hats and overcoats. Clad in his academic cap and gown, Harvard University president of A. Lawrence Lowell was appointed by the governor of Massachusetts to cover a review of the proceedings. Lowell declared the trial a fair one and allowed the sentence to be carried out. The bodies of Sacco and Vanzetti lie in coffins at the bottom of the painting, with the faces cast of lifeless gray parlor. Sean's inspiration. The trial of Sacco and Vanzetti received broad coverage. Newspaper published many photographs of the convicted men and others involved in the trial. Sean adapted and combined these images to create his powerful composition. Sean used his knowledge of synthetic cubism to create a tightly packed vertical composition. The abstract figures are assembled with flat shapes and sharp angular forms. Sean did not strive for lifelike realism in his paintings. Instead, he created almost mask-like faces on the three review panel members of the deceased Sacco and Vanzetti. Pablo Picasso once declared that paintings is not made to decorate apartments. It is an instrument of the offensive and defensive war against the enemy. This statement perhaps best describes Picasso's reaction to the 1937 incident during the Spanish Civil War. Living in Paris at the time, Picasso was horrified to learn that hundreds of innocent civilians had perished during a bomb raiding in the northern Spanish town of Guernica. Earlier that year, the Spanish Republican government had invited Picasso to produce a mural for Paris's international exhibition. He abandoned his original theme and seized the opportunity to publicize the tragedy of Guernica, thus creating the most iconic images of his artistic career. Guernica. Picasso created Guernica to capture the violence, horror, and suffering caused by the bombing of the town full of civilians. Yet there was no bombs, no airplanes, or anything to be seen in the sky. Instead, the viewer witnessed the results of a brutal attack. Guernica presents a jumbled mass of bodies, animals, and geometric shapes in a stark palette of black and white and various shades of gray. The monumental painting measures 11 feet 5 inches tall, 25 feet 5 inches long. Explore Guernica on the next activity. The single light bulb forming the shape of an eye hangs above the horse. What do you think this might symbolize? Various interpretations have suggested. Some historians believe that it represents another aspect of suffering, in that it resembles a type of bare light bulb found in a torture cell. Others suggest it represents the bright light flash of a bomb exploding. Others believe that the light represents Picasso's intention of illuminating the horror experience in Guernica to the world. Picasso used short hash marks to create the effect of newspaper print, and the patterns represent the newspaper articles he read that detailed the horrors of the massacre, and the black and white and gray that Picasso used echoed the tones of the newspaper photographs, restricting the painting to those tones, allowing the viewer to focus completely on the victims of the horrible event. How might this be used to vivid color, complete for the viewer's attention? Picasso incorporated elements of his Cubism into his iconic image. He used simple organic geometric shapes to create objects and figures, reassembling them and showing fragments from different points of view. How do you think that this technique emphasized the grisly nature of the subject matter? Picasso's neutral palette emphasizes hopelessness of the war, while the distorted figures and the exaggerated expressions emphasize the terror. Picasso united the jumbled mass of the figures by using the pyramid configuration and arranging many of the figures with just central triangle. Picasso created a balancing composition with organizing figures within a large central triangle pyramid, which you can see right here. The painting has a strong sense of movement in the way that Picasso arranged the fragment limbs and reassembled figures as strong diagonal lines. The twisted heads and outstretched pose of the figures create a sense of motion. All right, that's all we have for 5.06.